True stories from those that knew they were about to die. From Tatted Chick.
I even see like people die like all the time. It's like a normal thing to me. But
there was one time while working as a home health nurse, I had a customer.
I looked across the fields and I saw the gravestones. Something called to me to take a closer look.
Man was working on repairs in an abandoned nursing home when this happens.
Do something with it.
It's just money coming to me easily. Money coming in and needing me. Money coming in repeatedly. Money coming, it's just money coming. It's just money coming to me frequently. Money coming in to be with me. Money coming in secretly. Money coming, it's just money coming. It's just money coming to me always. Money coming in all day. Money coming in all paid. Money coming, it's just money coming. It's just money coming to me frequently. Money coming in to be with me.
hey y'all, welcome back to All Things Jenny. I'm Jenny. So I used to work in nursing homes, assisted livings, and memory cares. So I work with patients from all walks of life. I mean, I even work with a patient. She was one of the first models for hair dye in New York City. And I even work with someone who used to work with the lady that created Lily Pulitzer. I think she was like an assistant or something. So I've met multiple people. So therefore I hear a lot of stories, great ones, horrible ones, whatever. But today's stories are from people who are basically revealing secrets and or telling things that they did in their dying bed. So basically in the few days of them dying, they're telling their stories, confessions of the ones who's about to die. So let's get into it, because I've been working in hospice as well. So I hear a lot of stories from patients. I haven't seen like people die like all the time. It's like a normal thing to me. But
there was one time while working as a home health nurse, I had a customer who would always talk to something or someone in an old rocking chair that sit in the corner of his house. Now the first several times I just thought dude was delusional or suffering from schizophrenia or something. Then one day, he started crying and begging for forgiveness, saying, I don't know how many times I have to say I'm sorry. I told them where you were buried. Now at this time, I'm looking at dude like, so I asked, who is he talking to and what happened? And he told me a story of him playing with his black best friend in Mississippi secretly because his dad was a member of the KKK, in which Theodore Bilbo, he was the governor back then in the 1920s, was a member also. But one day his pops and his buddies caught them. He got slapped across the face and he told him to never have those N-words at his house. Then his father and his friends beat the little black boy until his chest caved in. He said he heard the bones cracking. Then he said they cracked his head open. Then they buried him near a swamp and he was told never to tell. And he said that secret and those spirits has haunted him everywhere he has moved. He asked if I could forgive him for all the damage that he's done to black people. Now me, I told him, even though you seem like a cool person and I enjoy working up here with you and your family, but I wholeheartedly cannot and will not. Those are called spiritual reparations.
Story time. Okay, so I used to work at this nursing home, and creepy shit only used to happen in this one room. And like now that I think about it, that room was creepy as fuck, but it didn't get that creepy until this lady moved in it. She was about 80 something years old, didn't do much talking. So I went in there to like clean up, right? I'm looking in the bathroom, mostly stuff is clean because she don't really use the bathroom. I'm sweeping, and then I was sweeping behind the door, and behind the door is a closet, right? And there's just like one shoe in between the door, so it doesn't close all the way. And like I thought it was just like there, so I moved it and I closed the door, right? And like when I first came in, she was looking out the window, and like another creepy thing is that her neck goes like this. So she's looking out the window and her neck is like this. And so when I moved the shoe, she was like, put the shoe back. And I'm like, how the fuck did she see that? It gets weirder. Like, okay, part 2, y'all. So while she's looking out the window with her neck like this, she says, put the shoe back. And I'm like, whatever, old people are weird. She wants the shoe in the door, you know. Then I noticed that the closet is dark as fuck, and I know how big all the residents' closet is, and her closet just seems so fucking deep. So I do the rest of the cleaning, and I just kind of like get out there, and I ask her if she wants her door closed, right? And she doesn't say anything, so I'm like, And so I close the door, and this is when shit gets weird. As soon as I closed the door, like I closed it tight, I know I closed it tight enough. Once I'm walking away, the door like creaks open slow. And y'all, like, I'm not the one to be like, oh my God.
That would have been the last time I go to that job.
But I was like, ooh, because I know I closed it correctly. So I go back to close the door, and let me tell y'all, she was in the crack of the door saying, get out before he sees you. And 3, y'all. Okay, so this time I was on night shift duty. And this is when it really got really fucking weird. I walked up to her room to like go and clean it and everything. And like before I opened the door, I can hear her talking. And she doesn't have a roommate. So I'm like, what the fuck is she talking about? So I'm listening to her talk. I'm talking about having a full-blown conversation. As soon as I open the door,
I wonder if she had dementia.
Nothing. No talking. She's laying down and she's looking at that motherfucking crack in that motherfucking closet. Like, have you ever walked in on somebody having a conversation and you feel like you interrupted it and it's awkward? Well, yes, that's how I felt. I'm looking around to see if anybody in there and nobody's in there. So I do my regular cleaning and everything. She's just staring at the motherfucking crack. Bitch, tell me why I opened that closet door and she was like, no. And I don't care. I opened that bitch and a fucking Ouija board fall out.
Oh, Lord.
Right then and there, I quit. Fuck that shit.
What?
Tell me a ghost story that sounds completely unbelievable but is entirely true. I'll go first.
So I had to hop on this trend because I could literally make a whole entire series about all the experiences I have had growing up, especially in the house that I grew up in. But I'll start with one really creepy story that literally gave me chills and still freaks me out to this day. When I was younger, my family had Korean exchange students that lived in our house, and one of the students shared a room with me, so we had a bunk bed, and she took the bottom and I took the top. And during this time, my dad had removed all of the doors to all the rooms in our basement because we were getting new carpet. And so I wanted a little bit more privacy. So for Christmas, my grandma gifted me some door beads, but they didn't come to the floor all the way. They were about a foot off of the floor. And my sister Callie would always come in and just steal my clothes, my makeup, whatever she wanted to use. And I was a pretty light sleeper, so she would slide under the door beads to come in the morning before school and to not wake me up. There was one particular night where my exchange student was visiting her uncle in another state for Thanksgiving, so I was alone in my room. It was nighttime, everybody was in bed, and it was dark, and I heard my door beads. So I looked over and I see what looks like my sister, just like her silhouette, and she's got long, curly hair, and she was crawling on all fours with her hair, and her hair was like hanging in front of her face, and she was crawling on all fours, sliding under the door beads, and I could see the door beads like hitting against her back as she slid under. And once she got under, she like hurried to the end of my bed where the closet was at the foot of my bed. So I was thinking to myself, like, oh, I caught her in the act this time. I'm going to totally tell her that I knew she was stealing my clothes. So I snuck to the edge, to the end of the bunk bed. And I just tried to scare her. And when I looked over the end of my bed, there was nobody there. So I just started screaming, and then my sister ended up running down the hall, and she came in and turned on my light, and she's like, what? And I was just like, and I just freaked out and told her what had happened. But that was one time that was super, super creepy.
Let me tell you, me too. So guess what? Story time! Okay, so this is another nursing home story. So at the last facility I worked at, I just so happened to have this patient who was at my very first facility that I ever worked at. She was a dementia patient and she was like in her 90s. And I was super surprised that she actually remembered me. So she loved to play bingo with me, and she used to love to sing karaoke. So eventually she started to slowly decline, and her time came, and she passed away. The next day I go into work, and I'm doing my normal rounds. I'm getting my patients together, letting them know I'm gonna do an activity, bingo of course, because that's what they love. And one of the nurses comes up to me, and she's like, hey, are you gonna be in the dining room? And I was like, yeah, I'm on my way right now. So she said that my patient was waiting for me to start bingo. And I was like, well, wait, who? And it was literally the patient who just passed away the day before. So I like walk up to her, and I'm like, no, like she passed away last night. And she's like, no, she didn't. I just saw her. I said hi to her and everything. She's waiting for you.
I have the spookiest hospice story you will ever hear. It's pretty woo-woo. If you like that kind of thing, you're gonna love this one. This happened at a hospice care center. We had 2 patients whose rooms were kind of kitty corner and adjacent from each other. In the first room was a man who was dying of cirrhosis of the liver. He was pretty much out of it, actively dying, confused when he was awake, and he had this yappy little dog that was always on the bed with him. The second patient down the hall was a woman with ALS who had decided to do voluntary stop eating and drinking so that she could end her life. This lady had been with us for a long time, and she had heard that we did an honorary toast with the family members of the person after they died with non-alcoholic, sparkling cider. And she decided that she would like to have that done before she died. It had been 3 weeks since she had anything to eat at all. She'd still had a cup of coffee each morning, but she had stopped eating completely, and she was really getting close to the end of her life. So one night she summons the evening staff and she says, I want to do the toast now. Meanwhile, down the hall, our guy with the liver disease is pretty much unresponsive, and for once his yappy little dog is not being yappy. The dog is just sleeping on the bed and the family is in the room with him. So the staff is gathered around Our Lady, and they all have their little champagne flutes with their fake champagne, and they're each saying something about her, and after the last person speaks, she dies. That by itself is very woo-woo, because people rarely have a moment where they say, I'm gonna die, and then they die, or they call everybody in and say, it's time, I'm gonna die, and then they die. It just doesn't happen very often, but it happened in this case. So she's dead, and now down the hall, this little yappy sleeping dog wakes up and starts yapping at the door. And the guy, who's been mostly unresponsive, sits up in the bed, looks at the door, and says, who are you? Oh, okay, and then lays back down and is unresponsive again. And the family says, there's no one at the door. So we're all pretty convinced that Our Lady's spirit was walking past his room. True story, I shit you not.
Okay, my one and only paranormal experience, and it's pretty bad. It affected me so profoundly that it actually changed my belief in the afterlife, and not in a good way. So I was admitting this patient onto hospice years ago, and like the second I walked into her house, like every hair on my body stood up. I felt like sick. I was like, something is not right here. It just felt really awful. And then on top of that, I hate to say this, but the patient themselves felt not right. Like when I was with them, I felt like all types of bad feelings, which is really awful to even say. So as time went on, she didn't have any family there, so her friends were caring for her. And they were a very spiritual group of people, which is great. So there was like prayer circles and angel photos and like dream catchers and crystals, things like that. And I'm not anti any of those things, just FYI. And as time went on, the friends and the patients started draping the whole house in like white sheets. So like in the rafters, all around the windows, then on the furniture, then on the floor. So like when you walked in the house, it was supposed to be like light and airy, but it wasn't. I feel like it was the closest to evil I had ever come. And I didn't even like believe in evil at the time, but it was like the second I walked in the house, it was like, oh my God, even though the whole apartment was like draped in white cloth and covered with like crosses and angels and things that were supposed to feel warm and loving. And then it gets worse because then the patient starts actively dying eventually. And it was so hard to be in that house and with that patient because the anger and the awfulness that was in the house and around the patient was like unbearable and like undeniable. Anyway, I feel embarrassed even talking about this because it sounds so much like a horror movie, but that's what it felt like. I think about that patient and that house all the time, and I pray for her well-being. And she didn't die a very peaceful death, no matter what we did. And it was awful. And to this day, my belief system has changed. Like, I do believe now that there's not just love and light. There's other things. I feel even like embarrassed admitting that, but that's how profound this experience was. So yeah, I think that's pretty good. Out of like hundreds or thousands of deaths, I only have one like that. So that's good.
This is probably one of the creepiest things that has ever happened to me. When I was younger, I was working night shift in a nursing home as a CNA. The night shift in and of itself is pretty creepy, but I had been doing this for years, and so like it didn't creep me out that much. But one night shift, it was like 4 o'clock in the morning, and I was getting a resident ready for the day shift CNA when they came in. We were always short staffed, so it was just something we did to help out. Just what we could, especially for the residents that like to wake up early. So this particular resident had a roommate, and for our rooms with 2 people, there was usually one person by the door and then one person by the window. So my guy was window guy. So I'm walking in the room and it's dark. Again, it's like 4 o'clock in the morning. I'm not about to turn the light on these poor people. So I just flipped the bathroom light on to give me a little bit of light so I could see what I was doing as I walked past door guy over to window guy. And as I'm walking over to my guy, I feel on my shoulder like this huge hand just kind of grab my shoulder. Not in a hard or threatening kind of way, not in a mean way, but just like somebody trying to get my attention kind of way. So I immediately assumed it was the roommate, but when I turned around, there was nobody there and the roommate was sound asleep in his bed. So again, it's late, it's 4 o'clock in the morning. I convinced myself that I'm just imagining it. It's not a big deal, just get your shit done. So I go over to window guy and I'm getting him ready and we're having a conversation, a quiet one because the roommate is still sleeping. So I get to the part where I have to put his TED socks on. And if you don't know what TED socks are they're very common in healthcare. They're really tight socks that you put on and it helps with circulation. But when you're working in a nursing home with the elderly, because they have such thin skin, you have to be really careful that there's no wrinkles in them. Otherwise it can damage their skin. So I had come up with this method at this point to kind of ensure that there was no wrinkles in the TED socks, where I would just kind of go like this with my fingers, go over the tip of their toes, and then, run my hands down to make sure that there was no wrinkles in the TED sock. So as I'm doing this, I'm getting him ready, I get his TED socks on, and I walk over and I do the right thing, and I run my hand from his toes to his knee to make sure there was no wrinkles. And just when I get to his knee, I shit you not, I feel a set of hands go like this and do the exact same thing to my leg from my ankle to my knee. And I just about shit my pants because I was certain what I felt, like somebody mimicking what I was doing to this person, but doing it to me. It was so creepy. And the creepiest part, like, that wasn't enough. The creepiest part was the resident was looking at me like, what is going on? And I'm like, I didn't even know what do you say? I'm like, whatever. And then he makes some comment like, oh, you look like you just seen a ghost. And that was not the last time something like that happened to me in this nursing home. So I am positive that this place was haunted. But I don't know. What do you guys think? Has anything like this ever happened to you? Leave a comment and let me know.
When I was 18, shortly after leaving sixth form, I worked in a nursing home, just temporarily, whilst looking for a full-time job in my chosen career. For background, the home was predominantly for people with Alzheimer's or dementia, and the building used to be an old rectory. There was a small, disused church on the land down a small abandoned track, and a graveyard in the field next door. The church dated back to the 1200s. Whilst working there, I worked the night shift, and I was new, so I didn't have a choice. We worked 8 p.m. till 8 a.m, and I noticed everyone hated working this shift. I thought this was due to the unsociable hours, but I soon realised this wasn't the main reason. There were 2 floors to this nursing home, and each night there were 2 carers and 1 nurse on each shift. Each carer would look after 1 floor each, and the nurse would be in the nurse's office on the ground floor. I was allocated the first floor. I had to listen out for calls, buzzers, and any residents moving about, amongst having to do regular checks on residents and paperwork, etc. On my first shift, I arrived early for a handover. The carer handing over to me said, "Good luck tonight, this place could be quite creepy in the dark," and let out a laugh. I didn't think anything of it, and I finished the handover and took the lift to the 2nd floor. All the lights were off in the hallways and there was no one around. I got to the living room and a carer who was waiting for me before she left explained that everyone was ready for bed. I just needed to help them to their rooms. There were only 8 people on the first floor, so it wouldn't take long. I helped everyone to bed, and whilst I was on my last resident, we'll call her Edna, Edna said to me, "She'll be here soon." I asked what she meant. "Who'll be here soon, Edna?" She replied, "You'll see."
Oh, I don't want to, thank you.
And she laughed. I didn't think much of it, but I knew she had dementia, so you have to take what they say with a pinch of salt, but something in me felt uneasy. After I put Edna to bed, I went to the office to complete all the relevant paperwork. It was soon 10 p.m, and the evening had gone well so far. I went and checked on all the residents one by one, and as I got outside Edna's door, I could hear her talking, except she wasn't getting a reply. I couldn't quite make out what she was saying and thought maybe she was talking in her sleep. I opened the door and she immediately stopped talking. "Hello, Edna. Are you okay?" "Yes, I'm fine. Why wouldn't I be?" she said. I explained I could hear her talking from outside her room and wanted to check she was okay. Her eyes bore into me as she said, "Little girls shouldn't listen to conversations that don't concern them." And then she laughed. I laughed nervously, apologised, and I left the room quickly. I went back to the nurse's office to complete some more paperwork, and I made myself a coffee. Whilst I was in the office, I could hear what sounded like a little girl laughing. It's gone midnight by now. No one would have any visitors at this time, and I thought certainly not a little girl. I walked down the corridor, following the laugh, and I ended up outside Edna's door. As soon as I got there, I heard someone say, "Shh." I stood there rooted on the spot, sweat pouring, trying to breathe as quietly as possible when I heard Edna say, "I thought I told you not to listen to my conversations." I opened the door and Edna was still wide awake. I made an excuse as to why I was back. "Sorry, I thought I left my pen in here on my rounds." She looked at me with a blank expression and said, "No, dear, I don't think so." As I turned to leave, an orange rolled off the table and onto the floor by my feet. I turned to look at Edna, but she hadn't moved. "Edna," I said, "who were you talking to earlier?" Half of me intrigued, the other half not wanting to know her answer. "My friend Alice," she said. "She's here now, can't you see her?"
Oh, no.
She laughed. Again, I thought she was joking. No, I can't see anyone in here, Edna. Where is she?" "She's behind you." With that, I shut the door and ran to the nurse's office. I used the phone in there to call downstairs. The carer answered, and I must have sounded distressed. "Everything okay?" she said. "Something strange is happening," I said. "Edna keeps talking to someone and said there's a girl called Alice in her room," I said, panting. "Ah," said the carer. "Edna does this sometimes. It's nothing to worry about. It's just the dementia. You're fine." With that, she put the phone down. I sat for a minute, relieved by what she had said, and then remembered I could hear the little girl laughing. And it must be because I'm so tired, my ears are playing tricks on me, I thought. I couldn't wait for 8 a.m. to come round. I was clock watching now, both because I was so tired but also scared to death. It was 2 a.m. now, and I thought it would be best to keep myself busy. I went to the dining room and started to do some cleaning down the tables, tidying the cutlery and glasses away, etc., when I heard on the door across the room. I was frozen on the spot. I hadn't heard anyone leaving their beds, and residents had alarmed pressured mats by their beds, so we'd be notified if they got up. I made my way over to the door slowly, and before I got to the door, I heard footsteps racing down the corridor. I raced to the door and opened it, but there was no one there. None of the residents would be capable of running, and no one from downstairs had come up. Otherwise, I would have heard the lift. I told myself I must have been hearing things, and I carried on what I was doing. 4 a.m. came, and it was time to do my rounds again. I checked everyone's room, leaving Edna's to the end. I stood outside her door again, listening. This time, silence. I opened her door quietly, and she was sound asleep. What a relief, I thought. I went over to her bedside to take her empty water glass to refill in case she woke in the night. As I got to her bed, I felt a cold breeze around my legs. Weird, I thought. The window wasn't open in here. I collected her glass and started to walk back to the door, and it slammed shut.
Oh, God.
The doors in the home have automatic stoppers, so they shouldn't slam ever. I went over to the door, but the handle was stuck, and no matter how hard I turned, twisted it just wouldn't turn. I was panicking now. The noise had woken Edna. "Are you okay, dear?" she said. I turned to look at her. "Sorry, I didn't mean to wake you. The door slammed and now I can't open it." She laughed. "That'll be Alice playing tricks on you." I looked at her vacantly. "Edna, who's Alice?" "I told you, she's my friend."
No.
"She doesn't like new people," she said. Edna then sat up in bed and said quietly, "Alice, let the nice young girl out. She's not going to cause any harm." I heard the door handle rattle and footsteps running up the corridor again. I tried the door and this time it opened. "Thank you, Edna," I said. "I don't know who Alice is, but I really mean her no harm. I'm just here to do my job." "She knows that now," said Edna. The rest of my shift went by peacefully. 8 a.m. came, I did my handover and mentioned to one of the carers what had happened. She said similar had happened to her when she first started working here, but she put it down to her mind playing tricks on her. I picked up my bags, made my way to my car, and as I stood waiting for the car to defrost, I looked across the fields and I saw the gravestones. Something called to me to take a closer look. I walked a few meters across the field and the first stone I came across was scribed, "Here lieth the body of Alice, who died March 14th, 1692, aged 7 years. After that first night, no cruel tricks were played on me, but I could always feel a presence when I worked a night shift. Maybe it was my mind playing tricks on me, or maybe Alice was my friend too now. Thanks, Lottie.
So this story was submitted by a young lady named Jasmine. She said, "Hi, I'm an African-American young lady who used to work at a nursing home back in 2016. She says that I always work day shift, but this one time I decided to pick up a night shift because of the shift differentials." Okay, yeah, I understand those, trust me. She said in the small town, there's not much nursing homes there. This one is one of the first one that was built, and then there's like 3 more. So while working, she said it was very quiet. So quiet that you can hear the sound of every machine in the nursing home, as well as soft cough coming from the patients. Everything seems normal except for this one room that always gives me the chills, room 13. She says that her patient, Miss Waverly, was a frail old lady with a sharp tongue and a cold demeanor. Jasmine heard whispers from other staff about Miss Waverly's past, how she was once a proud, wealthy woman with a controversial history, okay? But Jasmine had learned to tune out the gossip. Her job was to care for the patients, for the residents, not judge them. That's nice. That night, as Jasmine entered Miss Waverly's room, she found the woman sitting upright in her bed, her eyes wide open, wide with tears. "He's coming for me," Miss Waverly whispers, clutching her blanket tightly. Jasmine paused, confused. "Who's coming for you, Miss Waverly?" "Miss Waverly, the boy," the old woman cracked. Her voice trembled. "The little black boy I warned. I see him in the shadows. He's here waiting for me to take my last breath." Oh, shucks, okay? Jasmine felt a chill runs down her spine. She sat on the edge of the bed trying to calm the woman. "Miss Waverly, you're just tired. Let's get you comfortably and..." "No," Miss Waverly snaps. Her voice suddenly changed, tears streaming down her sunken cheeks. "I need to confess. I need to tell you something before it's too late." Oh, I thought my time stopped, sorry. "I need to tell you something before it's too late." Reluctantly, Jasmine nodded, allowing the woman to speak. Miss Waverly began to recount a horrible tale from decades ago. When she was a young woman in the small town, she had accused a little black boy, no older than 10, of stealing from her family. But it wasn't true. The boy hadn't stolen anything. He was just a scapegoat for her own mistakes. Fueled by her own lies, the town turned on the boy. They tortured him, humiliated him in ways Jasmine could barely comprehend. And when they were done, they left him in the woods to die alone. No one had ever been held accountable. Miss Waverly's voice broke as she whispered, "He's been waiting all these years. I see him, Jasmine, every night. In my dreams, in the dark corners of the rooms, he's coming to drag me to where I belong." Jasmine felt sick to her stomach. She wanted to leave the room, to escape the darkness of the confession, but she couldn't move. Something compelled her to stay. "I'm sorry," Miss Waverly sobbed, gripping Jasmine's hand. "I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. I was young and I was stupid. I didn't know what I was doing." But Jasmine couldn't see it in the woman's eyes. She knew exactly what she was doing back then. As Miss Waverly breathing grows shallow, the temperature in the room dropped. The light flickered, and impressed weight seems to settle over the space. Jasmine's heart pounded as she glanced around, feeling as if someone or something was watching them. And then she saw it. In the corner of her room, a shadowy figure emerged. It seemed small, but like the size of a child, but its pressure was menacing. The figure stepped closer, and Jasmine could feel an unnatural chill creeping up her arms. Miss Waverly let out a strange cry. Her body convulsed as she tried to pull away. "He's here," she screamed. Her voice echoed in the room. "He's coming to take me." Jasmine tried to call for help, but her voice caught in her throat. The shadow moved closer. Its outline became clearer. It was the boy. His eyes hollow, his face twisted in silent rage. Miss Waverly's scream turned into goggles, and then silent. Her lifeless body left back against the pillow, her eyes wide in terror. The shadow lingered for a moment, staring directly at Jasmine, before fading into the darkness. Shaking, Jasmine stumbled out of the room. Jasmine stumbled out of the room. Her mind was racing. She didn't know if what she had just seen was real or a product of her own imagination. But one thing was certain. Miss Waverly's past had finally caught up to her, and the little boy she wronged had came to collect his dues. Jasmine never worked another night at that nursing home again. But sometimes at nighttime, she would hear faint whispers in the shadows, whispers of a little boy still seeking justice. Ooh, that was a creepy one. Anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video, and whatever you have to say, let me know in the comment section. What do you think about this video? If you guys want me to continue to tell like spooky stories more often than actual stories that I'll be sharing different topics, let me know and I will do just that. I'm going to try to post more spooky stories because I really enjoy reading or even telling you guys these stories. And please do not come for my reading. Like I said before, English is not my first language, so I try, okay? Don't come for me. I'll talk to you guys later. Love you guys. Bye.
Back when I was in my late 20s, I worked the night shift at a local nursing home. The job wasn't particularly hard, and most of the time it was fairly dull, but there was one incident that stuck with me for many years after I quit. It had been an uneventful start to the shift. I was in the nurse's station, drinking coffee to keep me awake while keeping an eye on the monitors and filling out some paperwork in between. We had motion sensors out in the halls and alarms on the doors in case anyone tried to get in or out, and every resident had a button they could press if they required assistance. It was very rare we had any sort of incident, but we were always required to be on alert just in case. It had just gone 3 a.m., and I was in the middle of filling out some forms when the motion lights in the hallway flickered on. The nurse's station was at the very end of the corridor, with a large glass window looking out into the hall where residents resided. I glanced up from my computer, expecting to see one of the residents or another nurse, but the corridor was empty. I shrugged it off at first, since the motion sensor could be finicky and sensitive at times, so I figured something small must have set it off. After a few minutes, the lights flickered off again, plunging the hallway into darkness. Only, the glow from the nurse's station lights filtered out into the gloom. The second time the lights went off, I started to wonder if I was missing something. I climbed out of my chair and left the station, glancing down the hallway. I couldn't see anything out of the ordinary. None of the residents' doors were open, and nobody was out of bed. Maybe there was something faulty with the wiring. I'd heard one of the other nurses say that before. Shrugging to myself, I went back to the station and finished my work on the computer, barely noticing when the lights flickered back off. Apart from the occasional sound of my fingers tapping the keyboard or sipping from my flask, the place was deathly quiet. You couldn't even hear the wind outside. It almost felt like you were the only one in the entire building. It was so quiet, so still, that I almost jumped out of my skin when something tapped against the window of the nurse's station. I glanced up sharply, my heart stilling in my chest to see a face staring at me from the other side of the glass. "My goodness, Mrs. Riley, you almost gave me a heart attack," I blurted. pressing a hand to my chest as I met the older woman's gaze through the window. The lady said nothing, just staring at me through the glass, her finger tapping gently against it. I got up and stepped around the partition, my earlier fright still making my breath staggered. "Is everything okay, Mrs. Riley?" "There's someone in my room," she said in her soft, raspy voice, her eyes dim and sunken amongst folds of skin. I looked at her in surprise, my throat growing dry. "There's someone in your room? What do you mean?" "Someone watching me," she wheezed. "Someone in the shadows." I gently took her arm and led her down the hallway. "Let's go have a look, shall we?" I said, trying not to frown. What did she mean there was someone in her room? No alarms had gone off, and I hadn't seen anyone enter through her door from my position. But then again, I hadn't even heard Mrs. Riley approaching the station, her bare feet muffled as they were against the carpet. I walked her back to her room and switched on the light inside. A cursory sweep confirmed that the room was empty. There was nobody there. "Where did you see this person, Mrs. Riley?" I asked. The elderly woman raised a shaky hand and pointed to the end of her bed. "There. They were watching me." Her words sent a prickle of unease down my spine. "Let's have a look." I left her standing by the doorway while I took a look around the room, checking behind the curtain and inside the closet, and even giving a brief glance underneath the bed. "There doesn't seem to be anyone here, Mrs. Riley. Maybe you were just dreaming." Mrs. Riley shook her head, a strange expression twisting her features. "It wasn't a dream. I saw someone right there." With a sympathetic smile, I helped her back into bed. "Well, they're gone now. You don't have to worry." The woman didn't seem convinced, but there wasn't much more I could do. There was clearly nobody here, no matter what she thought she saw. "All right now, try and get back to sleep. I'll be out here if you need anything." I tucked the covers back around her and switched off the light, closing the door behind me. With a sigh, I went back to the nurse's station. Draining the last of the coffee from my flask, I rubbed a hand over my tired eyes and got back to finishing up my paperwork. The clock on the computer read 4:13 a.m. when one of the alarms went off. It was one of the call buttons from the resident rooms. When I checked where it was coming from, I felt my mouth go dry. It was Mrs. Riley's room. I hurriedly left my desk and crossed the hallway until I stopped outside her door. On the other side, I could hear the sound of whimpering. Switching on the light by the wall. The woman was sitting up in the bed, staring wide-eyed across the room. Her chest was rising and falling quickly, each breath slipping raggedly between her lips. "Mrs. Riley, is everything okay?" I asked, hurrying over to her. She shook her head without taking her eyes off the end of the bed. "They came back. That person. From before. I saw them again." I let out a gentle sigh. It wasn't uncommon for the residents here to see or hear things that weren't there. Dementia, Alzheimer's, even just the effects of the medication they were on. Some of it caused hallucinations or vivid dreams. I dealt with this kind of thing before. Whatever Mrs. Riley thought she was seeing, it wasn't real. "Mrs. Riley, I already checked your room, remember? There's nobody here," I said as firmly but softly as I could, trying to get her to look at me. "But I saw them," she whispered, her voice tight with desperation. "I know what I saw." I shook my head. "I promise you, you and I are the only ones in this room." She finally calmed down, her expression growing weary. Are you sure? Are you sure there's nobody else here?" I smiled and squeezed her hand. "I promise." "Oh, okay," she finally said. "I'm sorry for bothering you." "No bother at all. I'm here as much as you need me, okay?" I left her for the second time that night, hoping that she would fall back asleep and not experience any further hallucinations. By the end of my shift at 6 a.m., I hadn't heard from Mrs. Riley again, and assumed that she must have finally managed to get some rest. Which is why, later that day, when I got a call from the nursing home explaining that Mrs. Riley had passed away in the night, I wasn't sure what to think. Had Mrs. Riley really seen something in her room after all? Or had it simply been the senseless ramblings of a dying woman?
Can we please talk about this? Because I am a spooky story buff, and I was on a side of TikTok like a year and a half ago reading these stories from nurses, CNAs, medical professionals, just people that worked in hospice care or nursing homes that were saying this, that they were taking care of elderly W people that were on their last leg, and they would complain about seeing like Black people that they wronged, that they lynched, that they did, like they were confessing shit that they never would have confessed in their regular life. So if you got them kind of stories, I'm trying to read all of them, baby. Please submit them. Please respond to this. I want to be back on that side of TikTok.